Good afternoon. My name is Nate Ellich, and I am the Chief of Police for the City of Sammamish, which is a contract city of the King County Sheriff's Office. I'm here along with Sheriff Steve Strand and Lisa Heckman, who is the principal for Skyline High School. But I ask you please to hold your questions till the very end. We're all going to speak briefly, and then we'll take your questions then. This morning at about 7 a.m., our detectives arrested a 16-year-old former Skyline High School student in connection with the online threat that was posted on September 19th. The threat was posted in the late evening hours. It was very specific to Highline High School students. It resulted in about 270 phone calls to our 911 center on the 19th. Flooding our 911 center with calls from all over the country. The threat was so specific that it caused a lot of fear in the Sammamish community. The school district made a decision on Thursday, September 20th, to close Skyline High School. Our investigation of the threat began immediately. It involved detectives from Sammamish and King County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit. Detectives were able to track the IP address to a proxy server in Sweden. And just to be safe, we asked the FBI to also double check that, and they also tracked the IP address to a proxy server in Sweden, which was kind of a dead end at that point. On September 21st, students and staff from Skyline approached our school resource officer at the school with information that eventually led to identification of a likely suspect. They were able to provide detectives with enough information to obtain a search warrant. On September 25th, the warrant was served at the Edmonds home of a suspect who was a 16-year-old former Skyline student, as I mentioned, and at that time we seized computers and cell phones. A forensic examination of the computers by a King County Sheriff's Office computer forensic detective revealed evidence linking the 16-year-old to the threat. This morning we booked that 16-year-old into the youth center for crimes of harassment and cyber stalking. And I just want to say this suspect was arrested because people felt comfortable in providing this information to our school resource officer, and because our detectives were relentless and never let up. Before moving on to Sheriff Strand, I just want to thank our city manager and our council for supporting us with the resources needed to conduct this investigation. It took a lot of time and a lot of resources. I want to thank our public for coming forward with information, and to our detectives again for their excellent work. And I'm going to actually bring up Lisa Heckman, who's the principal at Skyline.
Hello. Well, the suspect wanted to threaten and intimidate all of us. He unwittingly provided a gift of solidarity and resiliency to our community, two things which now strongly bind us. We want to thank Officer Hall and the Sammamish Police for all of their support during this event. Further, we appreciate the parent volunteers who are willing to come to school and assist. And we want to thank staff who came to school on Friday following the threat to be there for students and to show their own resiliency. We thank the students who continue to act with reasonable courage in their online and verbal encouragement and commitment to each other and their school. And finally, to the multiple students and staff members, as have been mentioned, who offered tips and information that assisted in the case. This actually brings some closure for us. And even more importantly, it underlines the high priority that any type of threat to our school or to our students will receive from public and school authorities. People who threaten our safety in the future can expect the same level of concern and hopefully a level of consequence.
Thank you. And I'll just finish up by making a couple of comments. I'm Sheriff Steve Strand, County Sheriff. And this occurred about 2 weeks ago. It really raised the level of concern, as the principal mentioned, among not just the students, not just the staff, the entire community. And the message here today is very strong, and that is, this is not a teenage prank. This is not a joke. I think I can speak on behalf of the parents and the staff and the King County Sheriff's Office when I say don't mess with the safety of our kids. We take it very, very seriously. And we will aggressively pursue anyone who makes such threats. Also want to thank Dr. Rasmussen, Skyline Principal Heckman, the Skyline and Issaquah School District staff for their support throughout this entire investigation. It is very interesting to me as well that when we talk about the fact that this threat was made through technology, through a social network, and we received the information back through technology, at the end of the day, this was solved through relationships that Elena Hall, our school resource officer, had with students, and the fact that students did take this seriously. It was they knew that this was not right. This had to, we need to have closure on this, and they trusted that relationship with our school resource officer, Elena Hall, And that's really what created closure for the community and for the school in this case today. Outstanding work by our officers, our detectives, and our deputies. I'd also like to recognize the professionalism of our Dakota County Communications Center staff who fielded over 270 calls when the threat was originally posted back on the 19th. This case was solved due to strong partnerships and excellent relationship between students and their school resource officer, Elena Hall, as I mentioned. The school resource officer also acted as a liaison between the police department, the administration of Skyline High School, and district personnel, all of those different entities that had a great interest in this case. And Elena was able to act as a great liaison, making sure everybody knew what was going on. The contracting partnership between the city of Sammamish and the sheriff's office with the augmented resources, and finally the very strong relationship between the King County Sheriff's Office and the FBI, who have been an excellent resource for us as well. One of the messages we sent out shortly after this started was that we had reached sort of a dead end. But the fact is, our detectives, our deputies, school administration continued their diligent work, which has a good resolution today. Someone is going to be held responsible for this very, very serious crime. We can really send the message that we can pay full attention to this crime. It will get follow-up, and the fact is, this kind of a threat will not be tolerated now or in the future. I want to thank as well Chief Elledge for his outstanding work with his leadership of the Sammamish Police Department. With that, all three of us are happy to take questions.
Sheriff, I got a quick question. What was found on the warrant? Any guns?
So our computer forensic detective looked at the computers, and we're able to find, I'm not going to get too specific at this time, we're able to find information that was consistent with the threat that was made online. For example, you may have seen that the post had a submachine gun, a picture of a submachine gun on there, and that was, that picture, as well as the source of that picture, were both found on the suspect's computer.
But did you find any evidence to suggest that the threat was viable, that there were any actual weapons in the home?
As far as I know, there were no weapons recovered in the home.
Do we have any idea why the student would have made the threat? Any sort of motive, specific incidents?
I'd only be speculating at this time, and I have not talked to the students, so no, I cannot say that.
Sheriff Strand, can you talk about that link to the Meadowdale incident? You had mentioned a few weeks ago at your press conference that those threats were very similar.
The threats are similar. Obviously, there's also a geographic link between the suspect and in this case. So it would certainly seem reasonable to believe that there may be a link between that incident in April and this incident 2 weeks ago. But that will need some further investigation. That will ultimately be an investigation of the Linwood Police Department in Snohomish County.
Is he a current student at Meadowdale?
I don't know the answer to that question.
So they're investigating and he could then face
Yeah,
charges?
that's certainly going to get some follow-up, yes.
Could you explain what it was that prompted the students and the faculty to come forward about this specific suspect, what concerns they might have had with his behavior?
I don't know specifically why they were concerned about this suspect, but I can say that they were very comfortable coming forward with our school resource officer, which has been talked about. But that's why they came forward, and I think that it says a lot for our students at Skyline that they were concerned enough. And this is, you don't see a lot of people come forward with information necessarily these days. And these kids were comfortable coming forward, and they were concerned enough to come forward. And I think it's very important to note.
And they didn't have direct information that it was this student or former student who had sent this threat, but they believed it could be this person.
There were a couple that had a strong reason to believe that this person was involved.
Is this a male or a female?
It's a male, 16-year-old male.
Just curious, I don't know if you could tell us this, was he surprised when you showed up at his door?
No.
Maybe the principal can answer that question, because the students came to your officer. What did they come and tell you?
I think what they were bringing forward were, just as was mentioned, that there were concerns, that there had been statements made that from students who might have associated with him or had been in communication with him. And that's all I know. We just forwarded things on then to the police.
And do you know if he's a student at Meadowdale?
I can't answer what school he's attending at this point.
When did he attend Skyline?
September of 2010 until November of 2011.
And why did he stop?
I presume because he moved.
We have gotten a lot of complaints about bullying at Skyline. Is that something that you think that may have kind of provoked this attack, or something that you noticed at the school?
I couldn't answer what provoked this young man to attack. I haven't been able to speak with him. I don't believe that we had a case of bullying that is any more extensive than any other high school.
And how has this entire incident affected students in the school now?
Well, much like I said in my statement, I think that there is this feeling of encouragement and a bond that they have together where they don't want anybody to feel like an outsider. They don't want anybody to feel that they don't have a place at Skyline. And they're balancing that with being very proud about some of the accomplishments that students at Skyline have. And they're trying to figure out what that balance is.
She had mentioned, reports of bullying. I'm not familiar with those, but if that's the case, are you guys taking steps to look into those and to talk about your policies regarding bullying? So we have here a gentleman who's clearly disturbed by something that happened to him at school. What steps are you going to take to make sure that that isn't a problem at Skyline?
Well, I think anytime that we get a report of bullying or harassment, it is followed up on. It is working with the students, their families, with students if other students are involved. And we take all of those actions seriously and follow all the protocols that we have both as a building, as a district, and then what is written in the stable.
So did you have any specific reports of bullying regarding this student when he was a student at Skyline?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can I speak to that one for a second? As we have this discussion about bullying in a school setting as it relates to threats and violence and the arrest that was made today, and I'm going to speak both as the sheriff and as a former school resource officer myself in a high school setting. This is the subject of a great deal of discussion. Sometimes when we have a conversation about bullying and its linked to threats or violence, we sometimes come away with the impression that that somehow excuses or justifies it. They are related, but it will never ever justify or excuse threatening violence to students, ever, period. And let me make that very clear. The right way to respond to feeling that way for a student is to work with staff and to work with the school resource officer and to get the resources that they need to deal with it in a constructive way. And to ever even contemplate violence or threatening violence is absolutely unacceptable in every single case. That is a very, very important message that I think we all need to send. If a student feels that way and they feel bullied, and that certainly does occur, whether this school or other schools, the fact is that we owe it as school administrators, as law enforcement, as school resource officers to deal constructively with that. But these two things, although related, one should never lead to the other, period. That's a very strong message that I think we all need to send.
What kind of punishment is the student facing with the charges, things like that?
We're looking at the charges of cyber stalking and harassment, which are Class C felony, which means they carry a maximum penalty of $10,000 fine or 5 years in prison.
As a juvenile?
As a juvenile, and juvenile sentencing standards may be a little bit different, but according to RCW, that's the maximum punishment for this type of crime.
I don't know if you can tell us, but did he make any statements upon his arrest and admit to doing it?
He made no statements whatsoever.
Does he have any kind of other criminal history?
I'm not aware of any other criminal history.
What about his parents? Were they there when you showed up? Did they say anything? Were they surprised?
The parents were there when we served a search warrant, and my understanding is they were surprised that this happened.
Steve, you mentioned a couple weeks ago that, your electronic means of tracking this person had kind of hit a dead end. Do you feel as if you would have solved the case had it not been for those students coming forward?
No, I don't think we would have. And again, one of the reasons, and I was asked a few times when we were discussing this with members of the media, why are we paying so much attention to this? Why are we talking about this? And is it going to encourage copycats? And I think that's the balance we have to strike, but also getting the information out there, talking about how really serious and unacceptable this is, and then raising that level of concern for students and the public so that we do get the information when people say this isn't right, is an important part of this case as well. And I think that the resolution certainly directly came from the information that was given by people who raised their hand and said, this is not acceptable in our school, and I want to make sure that people know what the information is.
Can you clarify a couple of things for me? What you found in the home, was that a picture of the weapon, or was it actually the weapon?
It was a picture of the weapon.
And you don't believe that's a picture he took himself? That was one that was found online, right?
It was, the source of that picture is probably an eBay-type website from the Philippines.
And also, what did you find in the home that makes you tie it to the Meadowdale threat?
Everything we found was in the computers, and we haven't necessarily tied that to the Meadowdale threat yet. We're going to be working on that. That part of the investigation is going to continue.
And we don't know whether he's a current student at Meadowdale.
I don't know.
Could you speak to the school resource officer at the microphone? Could you come forward and answer any questions?
Are you comfortable doing it?
Do you remember knowing this student at Skyline High School?
Any behavioral indicators that stood out to you at that time?
He's a teenage boy that had made some poor choices at times, but was your typical teenage student.
Poor choices?
Can't really go into details, unfortunately.
You ever see him being picked on or anything like that?
And it was you they directly came to first, right? These students with the information?
Yes.
Can you talk about just how important it is as a school resource officer to be approachable, to have these students feel as if they could come forward with that?
Well, it's very important. It takes a unique officer to be in this position, I feel. Someone definitely has to be very approachable and do well with teenage kids. And we want them to feel comfortable to share that type of information with us and know that they're going to be safe and not have any type of retaliation or and really, I'm really proud of all the kids at Skyline High School through this whole endeavor. They've done very well, and it's brought them really close together. They know this was wrong.
Officer, was it you who made the connection to the 16-year-old boy, or was it students who came to you and said, we should look at this 16-year-old boy?
I would say it was a group of us.
So this kid came to mind?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Did you say you had positive interactions with this student and you thought that
At times,
during any
yes.
discussions you were having good outcomes?
Yes, at times, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you said. You said a group of us.
I mean, a group of us. It took all of us to handle this case. It takes a group of us to have solved this.
Oh, what, did this student come to mind as far as the possible person who had sent this to you? Or did the students come to you?
We had several different tips, so.
Yeah, and
That's
so,
all I can say.
talking about those tips, Steve had mentioned a few weeks ago that there were several students who were kind of thrown out there as potential suspects, and they were then eliminated as suspects. Was there something different about this group of students, and what they told you that made you feel like perhaps that was a better lead?
Well, I think my relationship with students also helps as far as who possibly we could look at or who I might have knowledge about. I think that helps as a school resource officer.
Just as the school resource officer, they were saying that it's kind of been a hard time for students, wondering who did this. Have you had any students coming to you upset about the incident and kind of talking about it in general?
They've been upset, but they haven't been talking to me. I know that the school provided extra counseling for students that may be affected or upset over the situation. But none specifically that came to me as far as needing to talk about being upset.
And I'm sorry, I just want to be clear, I hate to keep going back to this. There was a group of students who suspected, based on statements, is what I believe I heard, that came to you and said, no. So
We
how did
had
this
several
work?
different tips that came in. It was several different tips, not a specific group, several different tips. Sorry for that clarification.
Could you say and spell your first and last name for us?
My first name is Elena, A-L-A-N-A, last of Hall, H-A-L-L.
And how long have you been the school resource officer?
I came at the end of 2006.
If you guys we're running out of time, if you guys want to talk to anybody individually, now's the time. I probably got about 10 minutes to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.